meeting to order. This is a meeting of a special ad hoc committee appointed by the Board of Regents at our June 8, 2018 meeting. I'll ask the Secretary to call roll.
Ms. Farmer? Here. Ms. Green? Here. Mr. Kemp?
Here.
Mr. Payne?
Here.
Mr. Schooley?
Here.
At the June 8 meeting of the Board of Regents, this committee was appointed and was given the responsibility of reviewing and approving or disapproving a contract to outsource dining services at the university. And since June 8, the staff has been working on the negotiation of a contract, and it's gotten to the point that the President is prepared to make a recommendation to approve a contract, and that will be the business of this committee today. So I think I'll begin by asking President Jackson to make comments and to introduce the staff who will be making a presentation.
Mr. Chair, thank you. We're here for a singular purpose today to address the contract, the approval of the contract for dining services. I want to go back in history just a second and thank several people that are here. This process started about 11 months ago at the direction of the Board of Regents. It's been an exhaustive, detailed process. Many people worked very, very hard, and I want to recognize some of those. Vice President of Finance Administrative Services, Jackie Dudley, led that group. David Looney has spent a lot of time with this, has a lot of experience in this area, and we appreciate David's counsel in regard to this. Our General Counsel, Rob Miller, who has spent hours on this as well, and our former General Counsel, John Rawl, as well. Joyce Gordon with HR, there are a number of issues in that area, and we appreciate Joyce, and there's many, many others on staff here for the last 11 months who worked very hard, and we appreciate their time, effort, and energy. There was an RFP team that spent a lot of time on this as well. JT, Regent Payne, was a member of that group, I think, as well, and we had a chance to talk about that some in the last couple of weeks, and they did a very good job and addressed many issues in regard to where we are today. Also, all of you, we want to thank. This is the largest contract probably, I don't know this, probably ever awarded by this university, so it takes a lot of extra time and attention and work, hence the 11 months. And all the regents who've been involved in this process going back to November of last year. The campus has been involved. Specific members of this group have been intimately involved in this process. Chair Kemp and this special subcommittee have spent hours on this project as well, and we appreciate it. But at the end of the day, with our approval and if approved, this will help Murray State University in the area of student recruiting. It'll help us in the area of retention. Having many name brand options in this area will be very helpful to us. And also, as you all have noted in the contract, and this will be addressed in detail later, there'll be a lot of maintenance and upgrades to Murray State University in this area that will be beneficial as well. So I'll close with that and turn it over to the experts, and that's Jackie and David and Joyce, and they will, Mr. Chairman, lead off this process.
Okay, thank you, Mr. President. Jackie, you going to start?
Yeah, well, thank you. Not to repeat everything Bob said, but I certainly want to thank everybody involved. This was an exhaustive process, and the committee work and administrative work involved has really been very intense. So thank everybody, Joyce, David, Beth, certainly council, been a big help in getting us to this point. Our approach today is going to be, I've asked David to kind of go through a summary of the contract, take questions along the way if anybody has them, or basically I think everyone has hard copies of the contract. Kind of go through the highlights in sequential order. So stop with questions. Any of us that are here will answer whatever we can. So I want it to be kind of FAQs as we go along the way. So, David, I'll let you start with that. Before you start, the contract itself is going to be with Sodexo. That is the contractor that we have chosen, and that's the contract that you have in front of you. So, I want to make sure that's clear.
Thank you. Good morning. It's an honor to be here with you. I believe in your packet there was a dining outsource agreement, which was just kind of a summary sheet that I put together. I'm going to kind of walk through that. I apologize. I'm going to do it in a little bit different order than what you see there. I prepared that document based on topics and categories. What I've done now is I've restructured to present it in the way that the document is presented. So I'm going to walk through page by page, if you would. I'm going to skip some pages because I didn't think there was anything that was important for us to discuss. But if you have notes on those pages and you'd like to ask questions, please do as we walk through it. I'm just going to try to highlight what I think is really important that we all understand what we're getting into. Let's start out on page 1. And I did not have this in the notes, but I just want to make sure you understand this is an independent contractor. Sodexo will be functioning as an independent contractor. And it's important to understand, although they're an independent contractor, there are controls and agreements and regulations that we have in place, and I'm going to walk through those, but it is important to note that they are functioning as an independent contractor. On page 2, section 3.1 is the term of the contract. We originally talked about it being a 10-year contract. But with some of the delays that we saw, it ended up being what we are proposing is a start date of December 15 and running through June 30th, 2029, allowing it to end along with our fiscal year of 2029. So it ends up being about a 10.5-year contract. So we'll see later on when we talk about some of the finances and we talk about the amortization schedule. Some of those will be based on a 10.5-year, and that's because of the timing of where we are today. Also in that section, the second paragraph there, we talk about accountability expectation meetings held twice a year. These accountability expectation meetings are when senior leadership from Sodexo comes here and meets with senior leadership in Murray State. They'll happen twice a year to assure that we are on track with the deliverables and the expectations of the universities, that they are meeting our needs, and that we're very clear with our communications with them. So that's what the control mechanism is being put in place. Any questions on that page? No. I'm going to move to page 4. I'm sorry, page 3. Section 3.3 is the termination without cause. So, if we do run into issues with cause, those are defined in there. We have a termination section without cause. That if for some reason we determine that they really aren't meeting our expectations and we want to cancel the contract, we do have a clause in here that allows us to terminate that clause with a 90-day notice. We also have an agreement that transition will only occur between semester breaks. So if something happened, if they got into a situation they weren't happy with, or we got into a situation we weren't happy with, we couldn't figure it out, it wouldn't just be in the middle of November, they say we're gone. They'd agree to stay through the end of a semester and allow us an opportunity to have a semester transition there. So that was important for us to retain that. On page 4, it's a carryover, section 4.2, but it is what would be the third paragraph on the page here. We are giving them, through this contract, exclusive rights to retail activity for food on campus. Okay? So that means they will operate the dining services locations, but it means retail food activities. So what that prevents from happening is if somebody in town wants to come onto campus and just start selling something, maybe a food truck or something, and coming onto our property, this contract would restrict that type of activity. So it's important that we understand that's what we're agreeing to. So retail activity is actually selling of food, and to differentiate that from a catered event, if you held a catered event, a wedding, there's somebody's hiring a caterer to be there, but the people that are attending are not buying retail activity. That's not restricted under this agreement, except in certain locations. We'll talk a little bit about that. But if there was an event being held, the Greeks wanted to hold an event out in the quad out here, and they were going to set up a tent, and they had hamburgers and whatever, and they paid somebody to come in and do that. That's permitted. If they set up a stand and they're selling hamburgers to the people that show up, that's then considered retail activity, and that's where we would would stop that activity. Okay. The other, I'm sorry, I skipped over real quickly sorry about this, on page 3, on the 3.3, the 90-day notice. I want to just make note that one of the risks that we have through this contract is if we do cancel the contract, we would potentially need to rehire employees back and probably find a new management team to manage it. So that's a risk that's on the table with going into this agreement. In addition to retail activity, we're also giving them exclusivity on catering in the Curris Center and in Winslow. And basically, we're defining the exclusivities anywhere that we have a grease hood in operation. So if we were to build a new facility on campus and it had, and I'll just use an example, Chick-fil-A, and they have fryers in the Chick-fil-A and there's a grease hood in the extract, then that facility where the Chick-fil-A reside would then have an exclusivity for catering activities in that building also. Okay, but in the various venues, in the CFSB and other venues that we have on campus where we have meetings, there is not an exclusivity for catering on campus, so we're not restricted. If the department wants to hold an event in their office spaces, there's no restrictions on it. Okay. On page 4 also, on 4.2c, this is really important to understand. The university is still retaining all of its rights on approving pricing, hours, trademarks, and operations. The current meal plans, the meal plan structures, the meal plan pricing has been approved by the board, stays intact. The board continues to retain authority for approving pricing for meal plans and also our hours of operations. So it's important we're not releasing that right and responsibility. There is some language in here where their financial proposals are based upon cost of living adjustments. But those will all come to the board first. If the board chooses not to grant those pricing approvals, it will be my responsibility to work with them to try to find out some compensating factor for that and then bring that back to the board. And it's also important to note there are no new fees in this contract. We've seen other schools implement programs where they've had, if they didn't meet some minimums, then there would be some fees that might kick in or something like that. There are no fees added to this contract that don't currently exist already in the program. Let me go now to page 7. On 6.1 and 6.2, to note, this is talking about the building and the equipment. So the buildings themselves and the equipment that's inside the building. The buildings and all the equipment in those buildings will continue to be the property of the university. So we will still own the buildings. We'll be responsible for maintenance and repair on the buildings. We will still own the equipment. We are responsible for maintenance and repair on the equipment. The way the contract is structured, we'll see a little bit later, Sodexo will be providing a maintenance and repair budget that will be used for repairing that equipment. And they will actually be calling the service techs to keep the equipment running, but the equipment remains the university's property.
Question?
Yes?
And this includes any new equipment that is purchased?
That is correct. It is correct. Okay, I'll move to page 10. So if you had any questions on 7, 8, or 9, get into those. I think most of that's just kind of defining what our current program is, and that's, we're all in agreement of how that's going to function.
You say the meal plan fees and costs are the same as we have now?
That is correct. The pricing is still approved. No changes in the pricing, and that includes the faculty and staff programs and the way those are being operated. No changes to that at all.
Okay.
We would bring those back to the board as the board has always voted on the plan costs.
Okay.
So at the bottom of page 10 on 7.2c, and it carries over mostly onto page 11, we're talking, and 7.2b, the commission structure. So we talked a little bit about retail activities, you kind of understand that. The commission structure is 20% on meal plan activity, 10% is on retail sales, 10% on catering, and 10% on camps and conferences, and then 40% on concessions. Okay. On the top of page 11, the column that you see there is a minimum guarantee. So they are guaranteeing a minimum commission each year based on the assumptions that we have in the meal plan participation and those the commission amounts that are there, and that's the schedule that you see there in front of you on page 11 at the top. On page 11, also 7.2p, the comment about the commissions are based on the assumptions as specified. So when we prepared the RFP, we gave them an estimate of how many students are currently enrolled on the meal plans, as well as what our growth expectations are. And so the financial proposals are based upon us meeting those. If we deviate from those assumptions, then there is a right to come back and renegotiate some of those terms. So instead of it being an automatic reduction in commissions, it might be some other kind of adjustment could be made. Maybe we agree on utility rates or something else to help offset the variances. But there's a clause that allows them, if there are any deviations from us meeting those assumptions. Okay. On page 12, 7.6, we talk about investments that are coming in. So there are 4 different investments that we're going to be talking about. Investment number 1 is upon signing, there's a $3 million investment that's made available to the university for renovations, upgrades, enhancements to the food service program. There's a $3 million influx on December 15th. I'm going to note here that amortization is a straight line over 10.5 years. So in one of the schedules that we had prepared, we showed how that landed into the financial projections for what we're doing. The particular usage of those investments is a mutually agreed upon idea. And so we'll do some work to identify what's important to the Murray State students, how we want to use that money, and where we choose to invest in the dining programs once that money becomes available. There's a second investment of $3.5 million that will occur on July 1 of 2020. It's about a year and a half into the contract. Again, for enhancements and investments to the programs for dining services. And that one's amortized over 9 years. And then investment 3 happens in July 1 of 2021 is an additional $1 million. That one's amortized over 8 years, the remaining piece of the contract. So all those investments are through June 30 of 2029. So all the investment amortization ends on June 30, 2029. The fourth piece of funds is on 7.7. It's an unrestricted fund. If you want to think of that as like a signing bonus, there's an unrestricted fund of $1.5 million that will come to the university. And that will be on straight 10 years. That'll be funded July 1, 2019. I'll point out that the amortization schedule, if for some reason we decided that the contract be terminated with or without cause, there would be an expectation that there's a return back of the unamortized balance on those investments. So that is a risk that we walk into. Do you want to talk about it? No?
Yeah, well, what that means really is if, let's say we get to year 5 and we need to end the contract, whatever is unamortized of these investments that you see in the contract, we would owe back to the contractor. So they're investing and they're giving that length of time for the initial $3 million to recover that over a 10-year period. So if the contract doesn't reach maturity, then we would owe them the balance of that. So that's a risk element that we have. I'm going to be transparent with that.
Just the balance, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just the balance.
Yes.
Okay.
Continuing on page 13 on 7.8, the in-kind catering fund. They've set up 2 different funds to help us with student success and student activities. A $50,000 fund towards student success. This is a per year fund, and $25,000 a year towards student activities. So students are holding events and they want to support the dining program. In the past, they would just come and ask the dining program to help subsidize them. So they're continuing to offer that kind of support. It doesn't define in depth how it can or can't be used. It's up to us to make that determination. I will point out that the language of the contract you'll see throughout is any kind of university approval has me listed as the authoritative party for that. My responsibility is to communicate to the appropriate parties on campus. So if it's something about marketing, I would be talking to Dr. King about. If it's something related to student success programs, I'd be working with Dr. Robinson, that kind of thing. Anything that would need to come normally board approval, my responsibility is to make sure it gets to the right people to approve, but not having them navigate the entire university pull it to the front. In addition to the student success and student activities, on page 14, there's a VIP catering fund, and that is an additional $50,000 a year of activities that occur on campus. We're holding an employee appreciation luncheon or something that typically we've asked dining to help subsidize or something like that. So there's still monies that are set aside for those types of activities on campus. We haven't lost that. On page 14 also in section 7.11 is the repair and maintenance fund. This is what I talked about a little bit earlier. Sodexo is proposing setting up $1.6 million over the 10.5 years for funds to be used for equipment maintenance and repair. That number comes from my analysis of our past 4 years of equipment and maintenance expenses that we've actually had and incurred, and then scheduled out in the future with cost increases calculated in. That's where that number comes from. And so that fund is being established by Sodexo. They'll use it to make repairs. If any of those funds are not used in any given year, it will carry forward to the next year. And at any point in time, we can come and ask for some of that money out of that fund if we have other repairs that are appropriate to be spent out of that pool.
But to be clear, they're paying us to do those things, so we will, again, retain ownership of the equipment in the dining facilities. On
the same page 15, 7.12 is where we talk about the utility fund that I mentioned before. So currently utilities are cost calculated based on an auxiliary square footage usage of the space, and we projected out based on past numbers and the calculations a utility consumption throughout the contract. And so they're going to pay this on an annual basis. We actually asked them to pay it on a monthly basis so we can return back the utility costs. On page 16, an additional value to the students is meal plan scholarships. So they've projected $589,589 towards meal plan scholarships. It's roughly about 25 scholarships per year that they'll offer in an in-kind contribution. So those will be scholarships that will be identified, and we can use that in a number of different ways. We have the food bank program. We may elect to put 80% of this into scholarships and 20% into the food bank if so choose, or other ways to help students. But the idea is to helping students with needs to make sure that they have access to food.
Mr. Chairman, one item in regard to that, we discussed this. These could be 25 full or 50 halves, or
it's a dollar value. To put it into perspective, it was about the equivalent of 25 meal plans, but they weren't saying we're going to give away 25 meal plans. It's just a dollar value that's placed on that. And then the last piece of information I wanted to share with you is on page 20, on section 9.5. We do have an exclusivity contract, a pouring rights agreement with Pepsi, and that is included into this agreement. It's the second to last statement that's in there. But it requires Sodexo must comply with the university's pouring rights agreement. So they will honor and will abide by that pouring rights agreement, so it doesn't violate any of those terms of that contract. So that's the core of what I had to present to you today. I don't know if you have any additional questions that we might take at this time.
Any questions?
Going back to the retail sales where the fraternities couldn't sell hot dogs. Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm just thinking of a situation that usually crops up, usually around the spring with band candy bars.
Yep.
So then band parents, could they sell candy bars on campus to sponsor the local high school band, or is that out as part of this agreement?
I mean, we historically don't have third-party sales on campus.
Right.
So
but it happens.
Like Girl Scout cookies that walk through the sale. I mean, that stuff.
this contract does not cover those types of things, but we're not addressing whether those are appropriate or not.
Right.
Right.
Right. Well, yeah, they wouldn't be setting up a standard table.
Right.
The important thing is prepared foods. When you start selling prepared foods,
Right.
there are food handling things that come into play and licenses and stuff, and that kind of activity is what we're looking at.
Okay. When are you meeting with the staff?
We'll
Discuss
meet
it
with them later today.
later today.
Any other questions for David? And Jackie, you're going to talk about some
Well,
additional matters?
Yeah, I think it might be good, Rob, if you don't mind talking about the KRS. Our requirements with KRS were very important to this agreement. And Rob and John have worked with them very closely, and it might be wise if you can just explain what we've got for KRS and how it impacts the contract.
KRSB.
The Kentucky Retirement System.
Retirement System.
And that would be the retirement system primarily for our hourly staff.
So, as most of you know, there's litigation involving another university that had outsourced some services. And so, with that in mind, Murray State was very careful to communicate with KRS throughout the process. And in the end, we did receive acknowledgement from KRS that the contract and the outsourcing is not going to be an issue as compared to the other university that's involved in litigation. That because of the way it is structured, the university will not have a continuing obligation to fund retirement, but also the employees have certainty relative to their own retirement situations. And so we're very pleased that KRS worked with us in this way and allowed us to go forward with that certainty.
One item in that document that we received was that we are obligated to follow the IRS 20-point test, what determines an employee or independent contractor of sorts. So it needs to be clear that our process will be that we will end a relationship with our employees. We will terminate employment based on the requirement of KRS, and that is to be done to protect retirement benefits for the employees. As Rob said, we certainly don't want to jeopardize the ability of them to have access to their retirement or refund of their retirement contributions if they so desire. That just needs to be clear that that will occur.
And to add to that, the contract language all the way through, we looked at what was required by the retirement system. So we changed phrases, words, so that, you know, we would be able to do what the university needed to do. So while the contract language did require a complete break, there has to be a bona fide separation from employment, or the KRS system doesn't count it as a break. So some of the contract language you see was written in such a way to get the successful letter, because that was we did not know that that would be the case until the end of September.
It's my understanding that we have the approval through this letter dated September 27 from the Kentucky Retirement System, which will assure that our employees will be able to retire if they so desire, if they're eligible, or they can take their money out, or they can leave and retire at a later date. That was important, that we be able to protect our employees.
Additional factor is we have, over a period of several months, as we've looked at this, our goal has always been to try to provide 90 days notice to our employees. We're not going to quite make 90 days, but we do want to be clear that that's not a statutory requirement. It's not a requirement per the retirement system to guarantee the benefits. So that has been an issue, that has been a goal of ours. However, we really feel it's in the best interest of the employees in the university to go ahead and move on this now, because our next window would not be until next summer. And kind of dragging this out that far is not desirable for anyone, so.
I would add to that, just as a piece of information, we are following the WARN notice that some of you may be familiar with. We've talked about at this table before, which is workers adjustment and retraining notification. That statutorily, that is a 60-day notice. Rob and my office are working together on that. That will be the official. There will be a letter given from the university, but then the WARN notice has some additional kinds of more formal things that are required, but we will be meeting the 60-day requirement.
There will be some notice today, right, if assuming the committee approves the contract. And then the last day of employment would be December 14th. Is that right?
Yes.
I know we've discussed this several times. Insurance, it ends
It ends the 14th.
with us.
But that isn't part of the contract, it's
Right.
part of our dining
Okay.
contract.
Is there a wait period between times before they can?
There will be. I will be reviewing that with employees this afternoon.
Okay. But they'll be covered though through
They will have options for coverage, yes.
through that period of time.
Yes.
Okay.
Are there any other questions on the legal side? Rob, while you're there, I know you've spent a lot of time reviewing the contract. Are you satisfied with it from a legal standpoint?
Yes, I definitely am.
Jackie, do you want to talk further about the investments that are to be made?
Well, we can touch on them. The financial sheet that we provided to you does have what Sodexo had proposed to us. These are simply that, as David said, these are investments, how we choose to spend them, how Sodexo chooses to spend them. We'll work together on that. A lot has to be done to make those decisions. We'll be moving very quickly on some of those things, but they really do need to get to campus and begin analyzing what's best and what needs to be implemented as quickly as we can. To be clear, the investments that are over $1 million will follow our normal policies and procedures. They will follow state statutory requirements for procurement, capital construction. So all of that will continue to be followed. So if we do over $1 million project, that would still, the program statement would have to come back to the board for approval, as with any other project. So this does not go around the existing statutes or policies and procedures of the board. So I'm happy to answer questions about these individual things, but they are things that we will formalize probably over the next 3 or 4 months. To the smaller degree, some of the renovations are much smaller. Larger standalone or new venues, really those just have to come back to the board as we see what we need to do and work with the president, the students, and make the best decisions we can for our campus.
In this capital investment detail, are we working under the assumption it says fiscal year 2018-19 and does not address fiscal year 19-20? So are we assuming that the spending for 18-19 will cover into 19-20?
Yeah, that's correct. The investment is in fiscal year 18-19, the revenues come in, but the projects will be whenever they get scheduled and slotted, identified.
Okay.
So there's no new revenues coming in 19-20.
It will take us that year to get some of these.
No, I understand. I just want to make sure.
Yeah,
Well,
no,
actually-
that's fair. That's fair.
Actually, it doesn't start till 19. It won't start till like January 19. right?
Some of these will
Yeah.
be ready for fall of 19, we hope.
Right.
Some will have to go on through that year because of the size of the projects. But this will be a collaborative effort on campus. Certainly, David's group, Sodexo, they'll want to work with the students on on what are the options and what do they prefer. We have to remember this is a dining service for our students. And so we certainly want to involve them in these decision-making processes.
And I will say, on top of that, when we had the RFP committee, you know, that was this sheet here and the investments and the willingness to by both companies that we looked at to really focus on students. You know, that's what really sold me. And I know that both companies told us 40% of students, of incoming college students, use dining services as a reason, as part of their reason for choice for universities. And right now, I think that we're sort of behind the game, you know, on those 40% of students. And I appreciate David. He really did a great job with the RFP committee and ran a very transparent and fair process. So I appreciate that and definitely have confidence in him. And for me personally, you know, with representing students, you know, I've never had a more confident decision, you know, on this board that this is definitely the thing to do. So.
David, would you read out for the benefit of the committee, but also the public, the capital investment detail for 2018-19 and 2021?
The projects that were identified here?
Yes.
Identified?
Yes.
So again, I'm going to go back and restate. These were projects that Sodexo had brought during the proposal process. These are not necessarily what we're agreeing to. These are not defined in the contract as finals, but these are just conceptual ideas of what they like to bring. So the first year we're talking about tea room renovations, and tea room renovations include things like a Mexican concept that they would put in there, a lot of signage and painting, sprucing the place in a little bit different design work. There is a Winslow refresh. There is a concessions refresh. We already started the concessions project a little bit earlier, but we knew that concessions was a challenge for us and we wanted to make that a much better appeal. We're talking about bringing an Einstein bagel concept to the university. We're also talking about a Starbucks. Where the Business Express area, which is a snack bar that we have over in the College Business Building, doing some work in there. And the Fast Track, which is the convenience store, is expanding that program, the offerings that they have in there. And also, they had listed on here Hart Hall. I don't know that Hart Hall will actually happen or not, but they would like to see that done, Hart Hall. And then for fiscal year 20 and 21, they're proposing to bring a Chick-fil-A to campus, a Five Diner, which is a kind of a diner that's set up actually inside Winslow to give you kind of a concept within a concept experience of being there. Major renovations to the tea room, and one of the proposals actually had a freight cart, which is a repurposed shipping container that can be placed on campus in many different locations. It can do things like a steak and shake, or there's various different types of concepts that could come with that freight cart. And then the concept of the micro market. And a micro market is it's kind of a self-service, help yourself kind of C-store type thing. It's new to the college marketplace, but it's something that they had proposed to be to the Curtis Center. Major renovations again into Winslow. And then finally the enhancement fund, the $1.8 million that we see in enhancement fund is actually for fiscal years 23 through 28. Understanding that it's too far out for us to decide today, but there's another $1.8 million that we know we're going to continue to do programming with, and we'll make those decisions as we get closer in the calendar.
So these are concepts that have been discussed already. They're not final decisions, but that sounds really good to have Chick-fil-A, Starbucks, and various things. So that's what you're talking about, some helping us with recruitment and retention.
Absolutely.
I think this is exciting. Jackie, would you, on that same exhibit, would you summarize for us the annual value of this contract to the university?
The top part of that page, you'll see the annual sales commission. And that is broken down into 3 categories. It's in the contract. The meal plans stipulate in the contract we would get 20%, and the net sales, again, is what we've estimated that to be based on current enrollment and pricing. Retail, catering, camps, again, we talked about that. Whatever those net sales are, the 10% commission would come back to the institution, and then concessions would be 40% of net sales. So these are annual numbers at approximately $2 million, a little over $2 million that would come back annually. So as David indicated earlier, the contract is a 10.5-year contract. So the second box you'll see on that page is restating those commissions to the life of the contract, $21.3 million in commissions over the 10.5 years. The other numbers is a signing bonus, the $1.5 million that we discussed, capital investments of $9.3, and kind contributions over the life of the contract of $1.3, scholarships approximately $600,000, equipment maintenance and repair that we've already discussed, $1.6 million. All of those total over the 10.5 years, $35.6 million contract. So that essentially is the value of this contract, and we see it through to its maturity with a total estimated annual value of $3.4 million. And then you will see on the second worksheet that we did provide to you, there's a lot of detail on that worksheet, but it simply is showing how the university will use that $3.9 million, and that the intent, the analysis of this contract has always been that education in general would remain whole with what we're receiving from dining services today in our budget. We would continue to receive at least that amount, so there would not be a change in that as far as a decrease goes.
Well, there's a potential to have increase.
That's correct.
In that bottom line.
Right. And because it is a commission based, that's only to our advantage for any increase, whether it's new revenue opportunities through retail operations, some of these branded concepts to increase revenue, because we will receive the commission rates provided on that revenue.
And the
meal plans could, if enrollment goes up, meal plans could go up.
Mm-hmm.
So we'd still get 20% of that.
Right, because we're not getting any fixed amount. It's really based on a percentage of net sales. It's up to both us in managing the contract and Sodexo to ensure the growth we desire.
You mentioned earlier things like almost midnight breakfast and senior breakfast and stuff will continue, right?
That is correct. That was calculated into those student success programs, the
That's what I thought you
functions, we
said.
took those values. We didn't specifically identify them because we chose 3 years in to change the midnight breakfast program to something else.
Right.
We didn't want to be strapped by contractual language to provide that.
But similar stuff like that.
Correct.
These will actually go to Dr. Robertson for him to work with the students on what's important to have for those types of events. That may vary each year, actually.
Does that also cover like the faculty and staff? Or?
Yes, so there's a pool of money. There's a VIP fund
Right.
that would be probably more at the discretion of like the president making decisions on how that's going to get allocated. And then the student success and student events.
Jackie, you've also provided to the committee a financial analysis of in-house versus outsourcing to Sodexo.
Right.
Would you just summarize that?
I can summarize that. The first section of this schedule you'll see it is the university operated summary, and it's from 2016 through 2024. We provided some history on what the university has done for 16, 17, and 18. And you'll see the net that has been received from our own dining operations. And then the private operated are actually the Sodexo numbers that we've estimated. So we've done this multiple ways over the last several months with both contractors, but these are what we feel are realistic numbers. The net contribution from operations does not exactly match the schedule you've seen here, because we have building equipment, maintenance and repair on down in the schedule. But if you go to the bottom line, you'll see in fiscal year 20, and we'll go to that one because that would be the first full year, compared to $583,000 for university operated dining services, we're estimating close to $800,000 for that year from Sodexo. So I'm happy to answer questions here, but really what happens is we will receive the commission amount. So there's still things we have to pay as an institution. We will be billing our students for their meal plans just like they are now. They'll be able to use financial aid just like they do now, but we'll have some bad debt expense. We'll certainly have debt service payments we have to continue to make that our dining service is obligated for, and you'll see these payments on here. So those will continue to be made even though we have outsourced our dining services. The significant change on this worksheet, we have estimated KERS level funding amount of $350,000. We put it on the university side as if we would have to pay it, as well as the private outsourcing of dining. Level funding means we may have KERS obligations even by outsourcing. Now, what we are avoiding is the increase in rates on a payroll. So as we run payroll and we contribute to the retirement system, just like all of us have, we will not be making those contributions. With the rate increases, that's estimated to be about $450,000, which you don't see here. So that's not included because we really are not sure what that's going to be at this point because of some of the issues in the courts right now and legislation and the interpretation of the laws actually. So we are going to be avoiding the increases in the pension rates on payroll. I can only estimate for $450,000 that we would avoid. So that's not in these bottom line numbers. I want to be clear with that. We've only included the level funding amount that we would continue to pay.
But in summary, the university should be better off financially if we go with this outsourcing contract.
If all assumptions remain as they are, and we successfully negotiate amendments to contracts, the answer is yes.
Anybody have questions about the financial explanation of the investments? Questions on anything?
You say you're meeting with staff this afternoon?
Yes.
We need to say Sodexo.
They will be meeting this afternoon.
They were here, and students the same?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, the student workers will still be, they'll be paid by Sodexo or?
Yes.
Okay. And they're allowed the same number of hours or more hours to work?
That will be up to
Sodexo.
We won't govern student employment.
Right.
They'll be employees of Sodexo.
I mean, like now, I think it's 12 hours, isn't there? 20?
There are limits, some based on the work, and sometimes we do waive those, but that will be entirely a decision between the student and Sodexo.
All right, well, the recommendation is that based upon the proceedings, the Board of Regents Subcommittee on Dining Services, upon the recommendation of the President of the University, approve the dining services contract as presented, effective December 15, 2018. Oh, the Chair will entertain a motion this time.
So moved.
Have a motion, is there a second?
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Any further discussion? Ready for a vote? Roll call vote.
Okay. Ms. Farmer?
Yes.
Ms. Green?
Yes.
Mr. Payne?
Yes.
Mr. Schooley?
Yes.
Mr. Kemp?
Aye. The motion carries. And I want to thank the President and his staff, all the staff, and our attorney. And there's a lot of work going into this, and I feel comfortable that we've made a good decision that will benefit Murray State and our students and faculty and staff in the years to come. So So I want to thank you for all the work that's gone into this, and I know that the president is going to meet with staff this afternoon, and the HR department is ready to counsel with everybody and go from there. Is there anything further to come before the committee? If not, hear a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Motion and a second.
Second.
Have a second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries, and the meeting is adjourned.
Thank you all. Thank you, Jim.